Welcome to Scintillations, the podcast where we explore hot takes on the business of branding, consumers, and culture. Each week, we talk to the top minds from businesses shaping tomorrow, cultural thought leaders, and people with an eye out for what's next. Whether you're a marketing professional, entrepreneur, or simply curious about the forces shaping the world of consumer business, we've got you covered. From the latest trends in consumer behavior to the cutting-edge strategies used by the world's top brands, we'll unpack it all, giving you the insights you'll need to stay ahead of the game. So, join us for scintillating conversations that will help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of modern business, including developments in artificial intelligence tools, like this voiceover. And now, your host, award-winning brand builder, Erica First.
Good morning, Meghan. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Why don't we get started by you telling us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I'm a marketing consultant and I work with female-focused direct-to-consumer brands on driving efficient e-commerce growth through digital marketing. And over the last few years, I've worked in menopause space.
Which is, of course, what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for the perfect segue. And so what I've sort of entitled this chapter is what investors are missing about the menopause space. And I have my opinion on it, but you are the guest. So how would you answer that statement there?
I mean, I think I'd say that in general, everybody's kind of missing the menopause space. And maybe that's kind of at the root of why the investment community is missing out on it. I think just culturally, we haven't been talking about menopause, and a lot of people don't even know what it is. We kind of talk about menopause, but menopause is actually one moment in time when a woman is 12 months past her last period. But there is, this phase of perimenopause that can begin in a woman's 30s, 40s, and has a whole range of symptoms associated with shifting hormones. So we haven't been talking about it.
Yeah. And so I am one of those people. And I think it's interesting because I think my generation will be the first to demand answers, right? And
Mhm.
my daughter's generation will probably be the first to actually have the benefit of having access to them. But I remember when I was 43, 44, my body started acting very strangely. Like it didn't matter how much exercise I was doing, how little I was eating, that I could not control my weight and none of my old tricks worked and I was tired and forgetful. And so there were all these things happening. And I went to a doctor and I live in Italy. So, precursor there. But I went to a doctor in Italy and I told her about this and she was like, it's that age. And I was like, That's it? That's the medical advice I get? Like, sorry, that sucks. Good luck with that," which is essentially the response I've gotten from everyone. But it was the first time I'd ever even heard of the word perimenopause. And it got me into researching it. And I would bet that probably 85 to 90% of women currently going through it don't even know what's happening to them.
Mhm.
And so the reason I was like encouraged to do this episode is because we do think of menopause as one very specific thing, but that's like at the end of a whole giant chapter that carries with it, as you said, a multitude of symptoms. Now, you've worked on some of brands that are responding to this. What are some of the symptoms that they're trying to tackle, and how are they trying to tackle them?
Yeah, so there have been a ton of brands emerging in this space and tackling a variety of symptoms. We think of menopause and we really think of hot flashes, and that's kind of it, I think, as a society. But it comes with things like, as you mentioned, trouble sleeping, um, weird periods, worse PMS, kind of like revisiting teenage PMS. brain fog, changes in mood or mood swings, you know, sometimes hair loss or shedding. And so there's kind of this whole constellation of symptoms, and every woman is experiencing them in a different way. And to your point, we oftentimes you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I think personal, so after having investigated it and seen the rage of the range and rage of symptoms, which actually rage is one of the famous
It-
symptoms.
it's a thing.
Yeah, that when all of a sudden you don't things just like really piss you off and you have no idea why. It's because of all these fluctuating hormones. But one of the things that was really driving me crazy, as you said, was that everything is very limited to a specific moment and a specific symptom and a specific treatment, right? Like menopause, old women, hot flashes, and just give them HRT. And this is so reductive because, again, as you said, symptoms can start in the 30s, they can last for 10 years. And you can have any range. They say there's 34 official symptoms, but there are more. And the issue is that it's not only about hormone imbalance because there are things, inflammation that comes ahead of that, insulin resistance that comes ahead of that. And if your body's not dealing with those two things accurately, then it doesn't even matter what your hormones are doing. So there are all of these symptoms that we have, joint pains, insomnia, inflammation, insulin resistant. There's all of these symptoms that are happening to women, and there is almost no research about it and very few solutions targeted to that. So I see a lot of activity towards HRT, not HRT, what other long-term medical solutions can we have? But there are today a whole bunch of fast to market solutions that can be targeted to a very specific person to solve the symptoms related to perimenopause if someone had the inkling and obviously the research that they needed to back it up. What are you seeing there in terms of your clients?
Yeah. I mean, you've kind of got a couple of legacy brands in the space, Amberen and Estroven. And then there's a whole host of new brands coming to market that I think tend to be a little bit more focused on, well, I mean, just starting a conversation and
Right.
then changing the conversation, looking holistically beyond just, hot flashes and lack of sex drive. A lot of them are using plant based solutions. So they're looking to naturopathic medicine and science backed ingredients to treat different symptoms. And then I think the brands that ultimately win in this space are going to be the ones that take a highly personalized approach and really understand that every woman does experience this differently. But I think the thing that they're running into, and you kind of alluded to this, is people have to know what they're experiencing to be
Right.
able to say, okay, I want to go out and buy that product. It's not like, you know, if I have the flu, there's a variety of symptoms I'm experiencing. And if I see an ad for flu medicine, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what I have and that's what I need. Whereas you can't put an ad out that says, like, hey, this is your solution for perimenopause, because it's like, I'm not old enough for that. Like,
Right.
I'm just moody and having problems sleeping.
I think that's a really interesting point because, of course, you can't solve a problem that you're not aware that exists. And since most people are not aware of the fact that it can start as early as their mid to late 30s, you just assume it's like it must be a period, like a moment in time. Maybe I'm so stressed at work, it has to be this. And really, there's a whole host of scientific, systemic issues going on that are once you know what's going on. And, so I turned into like a scientist, basically trying to figure out and testing different things. Let me try this supplement. Let me try this because I did not have any interest in going anywhere near HRT because it seems to me counterintuitive that if I was having hormone problems, I would solve them by throwing more hormones on it, you know? And there was a rise in naturopathic medicine, functional medicine. And so I turned into a scientist doing all the research and trialing things. And once you actually know that it's happening, how it works systemically, it's not too difficult to deal with. You do have to make a lot of significant lifestyle changes, assuming, you want to stay healthy within a certain weight class and within, certain energy levels and stuff like that. But it is manageable.
Mhm.
The first step then from where the opportunity is in sharing information. So is like if you had to invest tomorrow or if you could fix this tomorrow, what would you do?
Well, I would start by talking to women kind of where they are. And that's what I've seen with one of my clients that I've been working with for the last year and a half. When I first started with them, a lot of their messaging was really geared around perimenopause and not your mother's menopause, and let's do this differently. And one of the things that I did early on with them was starting to test into different messaging and really hitting on those very specific pain points like, hey, up at 3 a.m.,
Yeah.
burnt out, moody. And that's what we saw the audience responding to. So I think that's kind of the first thing as a brand
Focus on
to
the
do to
symptom.
reach this audience. Yeah.
I think that's exactly, what I would advise too, because if you don't know what you have, and in any illness, all we can really do is tackle the symptoms. So is education a pillar of the brands that you've been working with to then say, okay, we've got you. Now let me show you what's actually going on.
Yeah. Education has definitely played a really important role, both in terms of, I mean, just we see our audience engaging so much with blog posts and with emails when we're being very informative and doing kind of storytelling work. I've been very surprised, honestly, by how much this audience is willing to read and digest information because usually as a marketer, like the assumption is keep it short, people don't read. So that's been really interesting. And then also there's definitely an educational component around compliance. You have to keep taking this on an ongoing basis and kind of building your routine in terms of what supplements are you taking.
Yeah. So I have a couple of Facebook groups that I belong to, and it is a thoroughly engaged segment of the population. And I guess the thing that I find a little bit mind blowing, I mean, I get it. We didn't even know it was happening to us. So we can't be like, why are there, why are there no products and information? It's like no one knew that this is a thing. But whereas marriage is a choice, having babies is a choice, this phase of life is not a choice. So 100% of the women on the planet will go through this process at some point in their lives. And so it's one of the most predictable product segments if you want, because you're always going to have someone who needs products to solve this issue. So to me, this is the most encouraging sort of like carrot to dangle in front of investors is so it seems to me like an easy sell. And then when as you said, there's lots of symptoms that can be solved with products that already exist on the market, right? I never owned a pair of sneakers in my entire life, was not like a super athletic person. I now have 10 different pairs because I need arch support. And if I walk too much, the joints hurt. You need collagen and this and that. So a line of shoes, or even insoles, because all of the insoles are designed against men's feet. So insoles that are for women. There's all these very easy products that wouldn't take that much effort that would solve a big problem to a large chunk of the market. Let's say if the world was yours to govern, which products would you want to see out there first and fast?
Let's see. I mean, I think thinking through my own personal experience, I would say something that's going to help with sleep and burnout. Those have been like my two hot issues. I think something that addresses these issues in a holistic way that I'm not worried about, to your point, like my layering hormones on top of hormones. Am I creating some sort of wacky imbalance where we're going to have to like test and adjust until we get it right? I don't want to have to worry about side effects, that sort of thing. So I think the holistic product space is very interesting.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember the company. I think again, because I don't have access to these because of my geographical location. So women in the United States definitely take advantage of it. But there was one company that's focusing on continuous hormonal testing, which is very interesting because I know I went to my doctor here to try and get uh, a full hormone scan. And she was like, it's absolutely pointless for you to do it once. She said, either you do it every single day for months, or the data is not reliable because it's a dipstick and anything could be happening at that moment that you could explain. So it's not very reliable. And because the definition or the nature of the situation is that it's a condition in flux. The supplements that I needed 2 years ago are not the supplements that I need now because now I've got
Mhm,
it's like I gave up alcohol, I gave up certain foods, I changed the kinds of exercises that I'm doing. So now I need different supplements than the ones that I needed beforehand. And so, as you say, it's very much a functional, holistic situation, which to me, as I said before, the first two things you want to look at or the first thing you want to target is inflammation in the body and a resistance to insulin. Because if you have those two conditions going on in your body and don't know it, the hormones will never be balanced. It's
mhm.
impossible because the body is trying to solve for those two problems, which are more important. So that's my piece of non-medical medical advice to anyone listening. The first thing you want to look for is inflammation and insulin resistance. What other encouragement can we give, or are there other tools that exist, platforms for information sharing that we could use more? Like, how can we get the word out?
It's an interesting one. I don't know as much about what platforms might be out there. I have found it really encouraging to see how much coverage a lot of these brands are receiving, not just in women's magazines, but I mean, even in the New York Times. It's really encouraging to see, celebrities starting these brands and starting to talk very openly about menopause and perimenopause. So I find that really encouraging. But
Okay.
yeah, I don't know about platforms so much.
Well, there's an interest, there's a whole on TikTok, which is interesting, where there's lots of women. And one of my favorite things, there was a whole kind of blow up on it a few weeks ago because there was a 26-year-old sports uh, influencer who was yelling at the older women, saying that their symptoms were ridiculous and that they were blaming everything
Oh,
on men. Yeah,
oh no.
it was it was messy, but that's why, one of my chief aims is also information and education because they don't know. I mean, they don't know and we didn't know. So it's like it's a whole discovery for everyone. And I certainly hope it's a category that will continue to receive attention, receive new products development. I think one of the things that might be a little bit scary or hesitant is because there are products that are slow to market because they're medical in nature, and if anything happens with a medical product, you can tank your entire company. And so it's a very risky
Mhm.
investment. But there are, as we've said multiple times here, there are numerous products and product categories that are in existence today that with a shift in messaging can open up an entire new segment of the market. And so I would definitely invite anyone, I'll put a list of the 34 symptoms that that are the most common ones below. And if you're in investment banking or in private equity, take a look at that, because those are definitely things that women need that they don't know that they need because they think it might be temporary. Why do you think it is, Megan, that investors aren't interested in this segment or aren't showing as much enthusiasm as we would like to see?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on. First is that a lot of these brands are female founded, and female founded brands tend to get less investment from VCs. But I think one of the bigger, more macro issues is that investor priorities have been changing over the last 6 months or so to focus more on efficiency over kind of the growth at all costs that we've seen over the last few years.
Mm.
And because there's so little understanding about menopause, these brands are having to do a ton of work, as we've said, educating and building awareness. And so there's a lot of upfront marketing costs that go into that. So when investors are just looking, straight up at customer acquisition cost, it can sometimes look a little high.
Yeah.
But there's so many women, as we've said, who just need and want these products and want a solution now. And so it's like there's this cultural moment that investors should take advantage of. And because there's opportunity to be with these customers through their entire kind of perimenopause cycle and serve their evolving needs, the brands that emerge as winners in this space are going to have a very strong
Mm.
lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ratio, which I think is what investors are really looking at now.
So it's more of like maybe a less win in the short term, but bigger output in the long term.
Yeah, it's more of a long term play. And because so many of these brands are new, you're not necessarily seeing that long term win just yet.
Yes, also because they haven't had time, as you say, because people are coming into the category slowly. They haven't had time to sediment, but the ones that are established now or getting set up now are obviously going to be the Ubers and the Spotifys of that category. The first ones in tend to
Hmm.
get the most and fastest. No, and also because then they can pass it on, as I was saying before at the beginning, it's like we're the first ones to demand answers, but my daughter will expect them. So this is definitely categories that there will be 100% development. And if you're not in it, someone else 100% will be.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's going into that? What advice would you give to female founders or the founders of these businesses to help them maybe frame their data or get more funding or get the attention of investors?
Yes, I think that for one thing, having a really rigorous data practice is very important. I work with a lot of startups that don't have that in place yet. And so oftentimes that'll mean a little bit of a scramble when they start looking at investment. So having that from the beginning is going to be a huge, huge help. Thinking about CAC or customer acquisition cost is always important, but kind of to my point earlier, there's a long game here where you want to be looking at lifetime value or LTV to CAC ratio and really focusing on, how do you drive repeat purchasing behavior? How do you create loyalty with your customers? How do you drive word of mouth? So just kind of building that customer value.
And another question that just came to me, which is a little bit unrelated, is that so in medicine, they have the therapeutic paradox, right? Where if you have a symptom, you take something and you feel better, it works. But if you do something preventatively, which some of this medicine or treatments will be, and then nothing happens, you're like, oh, well, maybe I didn't need it. Do you think that's going to be an issue at some point in the development of products?
Oh gosh, I would say at a gut level, no, just because these symptoms are so terrifying. It's like I want to avoid them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would hope that my daughter gets the benefit of never having to go through those initial stages. Not something I would wish on anyone. But before I let you,
Yeah.
Megan, where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about your business?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn at Megan, and that's Megan with an H, Hardy, or at happeningideas.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.